Zoe's joining us. Zoe, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Zoe is from
Thanks for
Upwork.
having me.
Let's do some quick introductions as we make our way through. Drew, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Sure. Hi, I'm Drew. Drew Callan from Multiplier. Thank you for the love, Danny. And this whole event has been awesome. I'm super happy to be here. We're based out of Singapore. I had to fly a long, long way to be here, but I'm super thrilled. I love this community, and I'm inspired by everything I've learned over the past couple of days. So thank you.
Deetra?
Hello, I am Deetra Giles. How many of you all saw me before? I'm going to be equally amazing this time. I'm just kidding. I'm not. I'm Deetra Giles. I'm the founder and CEO of a consulting firm called ExecuPrep. We are a performance optimization firm, and we work on DEI, coaching, training, and consulting.
Matt?
Yeah, Matt McKinney, the head of people strategy at Poly, which is the combination of Plantronics and Polycom. And our goal is really to connect individuals and teams wherever they may be, to have an equal environment among everybody.
And Zoe?
Hi, I'm Zoe Hart. I'm the Chief People Officer for Upwork, which is the world's work marketplace. We work to connect businesses with independent professionals so that both sides can thrive. Thanks for having me.
And I'm Mike Vardy. I am a productivity and time management strategist based in Victoria, Canada, but I can work from anywhere too, so I guess I fit in here just nicely. And I host a podcast called A Productive Conversation, so I figured let's have one. Let's have a productive conversation up here today. I want to start off when we talk about vibrant team culture. Deetra, I want to start with you. One of the things that we were kind of contemplating as we put this thing together was just the idea of measuring remote culture. So how do you measure remote culture when the people aren't in front of you?
So what's interesting is when people think of culture, they often start off in the wrong place. So let's back up to what is culture. And culture would happen to be people and actions and not places and privileges, right? And so culture is not about where you are, it's about who you are as an organization. So before I even start talking about how do we measure culture, I start with what do you stand for? What is your company mission, vision, and values? And are you holding people to those things? Because culture will be measured in the outcomes, and that's going to be no matter where you are, because again, culture is people and action, not places and privileges. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes.
What about you, Drew? What are your thoughts on that?
Super fascinating. So I do think that everything starts with understanding the why of a business, right? Like Simon Sinek, what is your why? Right? So we all have our own why that gets us out of bed every day. Hopefully it's very directly related to what we do for a living. And every company needs to know their why. And I think that's part of the recruitment process, and that's part of the onboarding process, and that's part of the development process. And if that is centered around people, and the organization is designed around people, it becomes a lot easier to measure the output of work because you're looking at the aggregation of the body of work and not just the input, right? Because the input isn't nearly as important as the output. We struggle with that, frankly. Like we recruit all over the world. I'm sure everyone here does. We have a very clear sense of what we're trying to achieve as a business. And it's easy to measure output by different roles. You have different designs and different senses of what's what. But the interesting thing is, we're doing employee voice surveys like anybody else does. How do you actually get a sense of the energy and the emotion of the company and how people feel? That's a trickier subject for me. Personally, I'd love to hear from...
Yeah, that's like qualitative stuff, which is the harder stuff to measure.
The quantitative is easy.
Sure.
Relatively easy, right?
Yeah.
The qualitative is much more challenging.
Zoe, now Upwork's been doing this for a long time. Remote is part of what Upwork... So what are your thoughts on it? Because you've had to do this for a while, right? Like in terms of measuring it.
Well, absolutely. But I love what Deetra said, just to build on that about culture, because culture is so rooted in your values and who you are as an organization. And it's also in the tiny little decisions which add up to the culture of an organization holistically. And so measuring that can be really, really difficult. We've tried for 20 years to do the best job that we can do on that. And I think at the end of the day, what we really see is it's around why do people come? Why do they stay? How are they feeling fulfilled? And are they driving the business forward in ways which are innovative, collaborative, and really doing their best work? Because your business results speak to that. And that's the best way you can tell if your culture is successful. But also like that feeling of what it means to work here. And it's different at every place. And now that so many of us are fully distributed, you still have a feeling of what it's like to work at one company versus another. And that, is a much harder thing to measure over time.
So when it comes to managing people that are on-premise and remote, Matt, I want to shift to you for a second. how is team culture different with on-premise versus remote? Because you have experience with that. Let's lean into that a little bit, because I think that plays a role, because there is some balance and give and take there, right?
Yeah, and I think, we've kind of heard about this during some of the other sessions, and I think it started with the onboarding one where, it's a little bit more intentional that you have to add in there with the remote culture. So, some of the things that I know have been brought up before is, having some of those check-in conversations, the 15-minute conversations with individuals. We like to do a lot of one-on-ones, where it's just kind of that almost dropping by somebody's office and having a chat. It could be some personal stuff and then talk about business. What are you working on? How can I help you? What can I do? And maybe I can connect you with somebody else as well. So, it's being a little bit more deliberate about some of those conversations. And really, our goal is to have that equality, right? Where it doesn't matter where you're at, whether you're in the office or you're remote and everybody's remote. It's making sure that everybody's got that voice, that everybody has that chance to be heard no matter where they're at.
Dieter, I want to go to you because you spoke on diversity, and I think that's an important thing. Because now there's the diversity in where people are and whether they're in the office, whether they're hybrid, whether they're purely remote. So what are your thoughts on what are the differences and how do you manage and get that balance there?
And so it really depends on, one of the things we didn't ask is how do you first establish a culture, right? Because we're not just talking about any remote culture, we're saying vibrant, like my shirt, vibrant. And so there's a difference, but it's giving permission for people to be who they are, even if who they are isn't necessarily a part of your culture. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. You can probably tell we have a good time at ExecuPrep. So we had one person, we would have events and I would pay for people to come into different places, but he would never come to any of the events. And after a while, we stopped inviting him. And he came to me and said, Dieter, I feel some kind of way about not being invited. And I said, why? If we invite you, would you come? And he said, absolutely not. I still want to be invited, right? But he has permission to not come, but also be included in what we do, even if it's not who he is. And so it's this culture that says, hey, this is who we are, but who you are is welcome here, but that's not going to shift who and what we are.
I find that really interesting because we make assumptions. I think that can come back to bite us. Living and working in Southeast Asia, there are lots of different religions spread across the territories, and we have some people that practice Buddhism, some people practice Muslim, some people who are Muslim, some people who are Catholic, and so we would do little activities digitally. Let's do a happy hour. Let's do something other, and we would choose not to invite certain people because we know they don't drink, and I think we would probably have stumbled into the same challenge in those situations if someone hadn't come forward. So that's a nice reminder not to make assumptions about what people do or don't want to be part of.
Well, and then there's also the introversion, the extroversion piece, all that stuff that plays into it as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating about really employing people in a globally distributed environment, which we're all increasingly part of, is I don't think we do enough to surface the differences between not just ethnicities, but nuances of different cultures. So for example, someone in Germany will communicate on average very differently than somebody in Vietnam, and very differently than somebody in China might, and very differently than someone from New Jersey might, right? But I don't know if organizationally we're training ourselves to highlight those differences and talk actively about power distance, for example, and some generalities that we might want to bring to the forefront of conversation so that as we start to employ people in different geographies and we have more people coming in from different backgrounds, we have a sense of understanding of what they might be going through or coming from.
But also even in assigning a meaning to what those differences are. I was talking to a group at lunch and I told them, one of the things I tell my students when I'm teaching them as a professor is that wrong and different are not synonymous, right? And so we often take a thing, so I'll give a great example. I studied abroad in Sevilla, Spain, but I was raised by an Army officer, U.S. Army officer, and I was taught to be early is to be on time is to be late, and to be late is to be left. So I get to Sevilla, Spain, and someone says, we're having a party that starts at 7:30. Guess who's the crazy American that shows up at 7:30? And they're like, why are you here? Because you said it starts at 7:30. And I made that being late mean something that it absolutely did not mean. So when we get these differences, we have to be careful about making assignments of meaning to that difference because wrong and different are not always synonymous.
Super interesting. How do you do that? Like genuinely, there's only so many people involved in the organization that are sitting across people and culture. What's the right model? I have no idea how to solve
So
for that.
asking the question, especially when you're talking about assigning values and mission, vision, values, what are those values and why are they important to us? So for example, that piece of me that was raised by an Army officer is still very punctual, but for my team, I'm very clear about communicating on this one we have to be there at.
Right.
But there are things where it's like, oh, you know what? I would like for it to start at this time, but no one's gonna die if it doesn't.
So you identify the boundary.
And sometimes it's my team. I was talking earlier, and I told someone that my assistant, y'all, she blocked me out of my own calendar. And she simply said, because...
Good assistant.
Yeah, she said, I was trying to add someone to a meeting, and she said, every time you mess with your calendar, you F it up. And I was like, but I want to meet with someone. She's like, well, have them call me. Right? So having that type of environment where they can give that type of input openly and say, this is our team, what matters and doesn't matter here, and maybe it does or doesn't.
Zoe, I was gonna, because again, creating and maintaining that environment, making people feel safe and empowered that they can do that sort of thing. Not only that, but especially when everyone's kind of working in a distributed way. We were chatting yesterday about some of the stuff that Upwork has done to kind of create and maintain that. Could you share some of that with people here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's so interesting because COVID put so many companies that were not experienced as remote or distributed organizations right into that right away. And it was under duress, extreme crisis for everybody. And so a lot of people are still kind of coming out of that fog around this is what, to work from home or to work in a different way than being in the office with my colleagues all the time is to have the crisis of homeschooling, or maybe it was just a crisis in my family. Maybe it was great for everybody else. But I think, we have really been clear at Upwork that for us, distributed does not mean we are never going to get together. It means we do it when it's helpful, when it's important, and when it's impactful to our team. So we want you to collaborate. We want you to see the people you love. Like, what a privilege it is to work with people with whom you deeply, deeply have care and support and affection for each other in the work that you do. So get together, but don't feel the mandate to drive to the office, an hour plus each way, save the environment, save your mental energy for different things. So we've done things like build in WeWork stipends. We've just started a program called Meetup, where we encourage one-to-one, lunches and coffees, or go for a hike, or go meet somebody and send us the bill for lunch or whatever, and post it to our social channels and share it on Slack and talk about this. Because the other thing that many of us saw is that our workforce has changed over the last couple of years in terms of we've hired a lot of new people. Some people have gone on to different companies. And so there's opportunities to connect with people we've never actually met in real life. And so do that and celebrate it and take advantage of that to continue to build in opportunities for connection. And that has made a tremendous difference. And it's really a joy to be gathering again.
Yeah, Zoe, and I think, key to that, I mean, we've been doing some of those same things as well, right? Where, as individuals are traveling for meetings or, out at conferences like this, and there's a team member close by, stop by, have lunch with them, bring others together to really kind of, foster that creativity. And I think, this is an example of that, right? So we've got a remote conference that's in person, and a lot of people are making those decisions to be there because they want that interaction. And I think Harry kind of mentioned it earlier, right? All of a sudden you think everybody's the same height, and then all of a sudden you meet people, and, wow, I had no idea. So.
Drew, you were talking about values before. We've all kind of alluded to values, and I want to know, why are values and how are they so important to building a vibrant team culture? Because I think that, again, I think all this stuff takes time, and we're just coming out of this kind of lull, for lack of a better term, and we've probably had some time to think about this stuff. Yeah. So not only how do they play a role, but how do you make sure that you don't lose sight of them now that things are starting to pick back up again?
I mean, they've always been important, but they're probably increasingly important now that most of us are not physically together on a regular basis. I think it's important for employees to get a sense of the kind of company they're joining, to make sure that there's an alignment of real interest and a value system there. I think it's important for people to understand, what are the operating, why are we here, and how do we treat each other? What are we doing together? So for example, I believe Sagar referenced this when he did his keynote yesterday morning, but we have 3 core pillars of our value system. It's trust, transparency, and thoroughness. Every company has some version of whatever theirs is.
Right.
But trust is probably my favorite, because what we're looking for is we want to entrust that people are capable of doing their job, and that if provided the right resources, they will, right? And so that's the first step in understanding when someone is coming into Multiplier, who is day one. We're telling them that, listen, we're entrusting you to do your job. Our job is to create the infrastructure for you and to provide the resources, but we're not going to micromanage you, right? You're going to be empowered. So for me, the value system is really to create a sense of belonging and understanding, a mutual agreement towards how we're going to operate as a business. And I just think it's more important today than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, not to discount the importance then, but today we can't bring it to fruition physically together the way that perhaps it was possible in the past as easily.
Deidre, what are your thoughts on that?
So our values are so important because it keeps us all on the same page on what we're trying to accomplish, and it takes us from the C-suite to the entry level, and it's that connection that binds us. And so it makes no one person's input and impact more important than the others. They're just doing different work. And I'll give you an example of that right now. Being concerned about what we're all trying to accomplish, that value that brings us together, makes someone who wouldn't know or care about what someone else is doing care. So just now I was listening, and as I was hearing myself talk, I could hear a little bit of dinging. I realized, because I was talking to the sound people, they were concerned about my earrings hitting up against the microphone. I heard the dinging, and because we have a value of all of us need to sound good and clear out here, I instantly, when the camera was off of me, I took off my earrings so that clicking wouldn't happen, because I know they're going crazy back there, like someone tell her their daggone earring. But that happens in our organizations, and so it's that value that makes the CEO care about what the receptionist cares about, right? And that's that thread that makes us all achieve the mission and the vision of our organization, and that's why it's really so important.
Nice analogy.
Zoe, Upwork is, a lot of the people, at least when I've worked with Upwork before, they're not necessarily part of the team initially, right? Like there's almost, and sometimes there's a transient level to it that can happen. Yeah. So how does Upwork think about vibrancy when it comes to building a culture with a team? Because some of that stuff can, like, you're not necessarily always going to be working with the same people all the time. Some of this stuff transitions in, transitions out. But in terms of Upwork itself, like, how does that vibrancy stay going, especially considering you've, again, been remote first, not remote forced, as Nathan Barry brought up, which I love that term, by the way. Love the term. But how does that work for you?
It's such an interesting opportunity for us. So to your point, we're about 700 corporate team members, and at any given moment, 1,600 to 2,000 independent professionals on the Upwork platform are working back directly with us, because every team at Upwork is a hybrid team made up of corporate team members as well as independent professionals in a variety of different ways. Some who are really long-standing, some who are coming in just to do a project with us that they've got these incredible skills for that we don't necessarily need all the time, but can use to make one thing really, really shine. And so you're right, it is this ongoing almost merry-go-round of some people who are on it all the time and some people who are coming on and off. And so a few things really help us build that culture. And so a lot of it is around being candid, being forthright in our communication, understanding that the serendipitous moments that we loved when we ran into the same person getting coffee every day at 3 o'clock, those things are harder when we're distributed. And because of the model, it doesn't always happen that way. So making sure that you create opportunities for those moments. And the earlier point, checking in with people, not just about the project, not just about the work, but about how are things? What's the weather like where you are, has school started again? What are you doing with your faith group? How are those things, influencing you, so that it's not just always about what is the output, what is that thing that you did for our project today, but making sure that we're really, really transparent. And we talk a lot about bringing our whole professional selves to work so that we're showing up as full, robust people and not just this illusion on the screen of the C-suite person or the finance leader who, you don't know has this incredible collection of skateboards off on a wall here that you're never going to see if she doesn't turn her camera. So I think it's just trying to lean into the unique attributes of each of us and celebrate that that's part of what makes this culture truly vibrant.
So I was thinking about work-life balance, which doesn't exist anymore. Remember, it died, I think, yesterday, right? If I remember correctly. And when you brought up like checking in, how's your weekend going? How's all this stuff going? I wonder where it's interesting because I think there has to be, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, obviously, but where is there a line there, like where people might feel that in the team culture that it's bleeding too much into their personal life? Like I'm just curious how we navigate that, no pun intended, balance.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of what we see anymore too is a lot of people want to join a company that's like them, right? So I think you naturally get some of that blend already where, the values are synonymous between your personal values and the mission that you're on. The other thing that we like to do is, during those kind of Zoom moments, right? When you're on a call and somebody's kids come running into the background, we don't try and make someone be like, wow, your kid just like ran in here. Like what, now we have to stop, right? We embrace that. And, sometimes it's, hey, how are you? What's going on, and having almost a conversation with the kids or the pets, making sure we show them off, like, what Harry did earlier. So, it's like we kind of help embrace that as we go through those moments, so that way people don't feel like, oh my gosh, like I have to be this box on the screen at all times and be poised and polished at all moments, because again, our culture, I guess, is just more open, that we want to embrace and see that personal side.
I think it's actually super cool. We get a better sense of who we're working with when there's no background, like what do you call it?
The virtual background.
The virtual background. I hate the virtual background.
Yeah.
Frankly speaking, I'd rather see what's going on in your real life. Like I'm interested in looking at your living room or your kitchen, even if you think it's messy.
Well, we know Zoe takes care of her plants. We can see them right there,
yeah,
right? Like
she's got a nice library.
I know,
right?
such a cliche.
So I'm a huge fan because I think it gives us an added layer into the person that we're working with that we might not otherwise have had access to.
But I will say the flip side of that is some people don't want you to know.
That's true.
Like there
and
are spaces,
and they have that option.
yeah, that I'm just like, what you don't know is that I created this 4x4 clean box. Everything on the outside of this box is absolute chaos.
4x4 clean box.
I'm in my closet.
It's right here.
I don't know, Zoe's smirking at that. Now we're wondering, is that just a clean
I know,
box,
you're
Zoe?
never going to see this way, I promise.
You brought up energy, Dietra, like the energy and stuff like that, and I think that also goes hand in hand with vibrancy, right? Like vibrancy means, like the root of it is to be agitated, which is interesting because I think that's the last thing we actually want is to have an agitated work culture or an agitated team culture, but like full of life or vigor. And how do we make sure that we balance that energy level so that like there's going to be people that are going to be, like always on and up, and then there's the others that, again, maybe they're a bit more introverted, a bit more reserved. So how do we keep them, whether it's cultural, whether it's distributed, I mean, we're going to see that happening. How do we make sure that they don't feel left out or aside? Like we touched on this a little bit before.
So we need to actually be vocal about giving people permission to not be like us. So you can probably imagine, my husband says that my shoes and my clothes are in the closet reproducing. Like he's like, I really believe they're in there having children. There's a delivery ward in there. And so I'm always going to show up vibrant colors. I have about 50 pairs of glasses, and they're all prescription. So if you looked into them, you could see my intentions. Like I am blind. But I give people permission. So when we have events and they have to be face-to-face, we had a conference in Vegas recently. I had some people come out of the country, and I said, don't feel an obligation to dress like me. That's not what we're here to do. So if you are a black, blue, gray, and if you're frisky khaki suit, then do that. It's okay that you're not going to come in a graffiti jacket and graffiti shoes. It's fine. And so I vocally give people permission to not be like me.
Yeah, I think it's important to do that in the way we work
Yeah.
also, right? Like I got kids at home, so I frequently work late at night and I'll send out emails at all odd hours, or I'm reading emails and responding and sending out Slack messages at odd hours, but I have to tell my team that I don't expect a response in that environment, because people are free to work differently, right? Just like we are to dress differently and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I've literally sent out, messages before, and I said, if you are still on vacation, stop reading this message now.
Yeah, good.
Right? Because I didn't want them to interrupt their activities and their time that they had for something that wasn't as important to me, right? And so it's communicating and setting those boundaries, like what others have talked about too, is, this is my expectation, right? This is the urgency of this, or it's not. And then give people that balance.
And I think we have to be vocal about it, because I think we assume that everyone knows if I send you something at 2 a.m. your time, I don't expect a response till a reasonable hour. And some of our positions are such that people are like, if they say something, I should jump out of my bed. There's an alert that went off and I should respond. And I see you nodding your head, Zoe, like.
Well, there's a
Yeah,
subtext,
I-
right? Yeah, go ahead, Zoe.
Right. I think it takes a long time to get comfortable in your career to be like, I'm good. Like, you can wait until 10 a.m. or whatever it is. I mean, one of the things that we do, because I think you're right, there's also this, if you are really committed and engaged in your community at work, you do want to show up and you do want to support people. So I actually just had this conversation with a woman on my team who is going on her honeymoon this week. And she's like, I'm going to delete Slack and I'm going to delete email, but text me if there's a crisis. And I was like, okay, like if there's a genuine, I need to interrupt your honeymoon crisis, I will text you. So she has that commitment that, God forbid we go through another crisis, but like lately, who knows, that you need to. So we make that deal. So you can say like, I'll hold space for you in that I know the things that matter so deeply to you that you would want to know, and I'll text you. And therefore, release that, give me that, I hold that for you. And then when it's my turn to go away, you'll do the same in return. And so that's a really great contract to have with team members, so that it's not this, you walk back into, your office, wherever that is, and that you feel like, oh, I missed this thing that actually I really would have cared enough to know about. I think it can help a lot just to say like, I'm your buddy in this one, I've got you.
You bring up an interesting point about the segmentation of communication, not just communication, but like, this is where, if you want to reach me, this is where you do it, not email, not this, because it creates, there's a context around it. So we've talked about communication a bit. Matt, I'd love to hear your thoughts on like the idea of context around this. The idea of like, if you're going to, communication is pretty clear, it's important when you're dealing with a distributed workforce and when you're trying to build that vibrant team culture. But context has to be there as well, like the idea of maybe setting up a framework or something, values, all that stuff, but like the idea of like, hey, if you need to reach me, this is what it is. You don't need to send an email at 2 a.m. The person may be a night owl and want it, but don't send it. Use the send later function, so that, because when you send that email at 2 a.m., you're not just sending the email, you're sending, hey, I'm up at 2 a.m. and you're more than willing to reach me. So how do we create context around that, and how are your organizations doing that? Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? And part of it gets a little bit harder being a global organization, right? Because you do have those messages coming in at all different times. But I do think that a lot of that messaging starts at the top, right? You have to, when you set that culture, it's all the leaders have to portray those same things that they're talking about. They can't just expect, tell everybody, hey, it's okay, you can have time off, and then be that person that's constantly sending those messages, because people start feeling like, wow, I guess maybe I should be more like that. And so I do think that there are those technologies like the send later and other things that you can do as leaders to help show your teams and others in the organization that you are really practicing what you preach, even if you may not be on the backside.
Drew, what do you think about that? You're dealing with a large global element as well, like the idea of communicating contextually.
He's right.
I've never
Period.
been right.
Profound.
We were looking for sound bites. There it is. He's right.
I we have to set the right expectation. He's right. If someone's on holiday, I'm not going to message them. I will still use Slack. I would encourage them to turn it off, for example. I think we have to allow business to operate as it does, especially in global workforces, right? So it's 2 a.m. here, but it's the middle of the day somewhere else. So I don't, a big part of what we're talking about in building a vibrant culture to me is a sense of belonging as well, and making sure everyone feels as though they have access to information at an equitable time whenever it's actually happening. So for me, I kind of feel as though I'm doing people, I would be doing a disservice if I'm holding off in one time zone for another. If someone's taking time away, I 100% agree, and I don't want them working at all. And I think that's something most of us hopefully agree on anyways. But I find just part of being in various time zones as well, I want the business to flow as it does. And I hope I'm empowering people and being very clear in communications on expectations that we're all adults here. Just because a message comes in at a certain time doesn't mean anything for you. It's just we're on around the clock mode, right? Because we have people in every corner of the world. We're in like 35 different countries. And so I agree with everything he's saying. I don't practice it the same way. I don't know if that's right or wrong.
But I think it's going to be subjective for every organization too, right? Like, I mean, you can set those parameters and make sure that people are, okay, it's that level of belonging, not just when to do, but when not to do, right? Or when not to, like you can go away and be okay with that.
The when not to do thing is increasingly difficult. Like we have unlimited holiday leave at Multiplier, and I've seen this before. A lot of people don't know how to use it, right? They just don't know there's such little separation now between work and our private lives. Like you used to leave an office and, close a door.
Do you think it's important, Dietra, do you think it's important for us to cultivate that, like, even though we're talking about a blend, for vibrancy to remain vibrant, do you think it's, I think boundary, communicating those, and I think permission is the key, right?
Absolutely. So I worked with an organization and we were consulting with them, and the question was, how do we help people separate? Because burnout is a very real thing. And burnout is even more intense when you work where you live, right? Because it's so easy just to go back to your office. So I worked with one organization, and they actually put in their budget to help people set up their home offices, even if it just meant getting the little billfold things. And our policy was, if you have the little billfold or if you have your office, when you close it up, office hours are over. Right? And so they had that as a practice. Like when it's folded, when this door is closed, this is my office, and when I leave here, I leave here. And the CEO, it's great to be the accountability partner for the CEO, because everyone calls you like, he's not doing what you told him to do. So I can call and say, hold people accountable, but I'm holding you accountable. I called you at 6 p.m. and you said you were clocking out at 5. Why are you answering this phone call? Because this is on your business line, right? And so having that accountability for leaders, but leaders holding the people accountable for making that separation. And it's not just about productivity. It's really it is about productivity, but it's not just about cutting off hours and not making money, but it's about keeping your people for the long haul, because ideally we want to optimize the performance of our people, and the data shows us when people aren't taking breaks, their performance just isn't optimized. So while you're getting longer hours of work, you're not getting better work. And the idea is to get our people and get them at better work.
And that's a beautiful lead into the next question, which I have for Zoe, which is, how does someone use their vibrant team culture and their remote work culture as a recruiting and a retention tool? Because, I mean, you've been in this game for a while, so how do you use it to bring people in and keep them? Because there's a cost to both.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a cost to both, especially in today's talent market where it's so very, very competitive. I think it goes back to a lot of what we've been saying earlier, and my fellow panelists have talked about. The values of the company show up from the moment you do outreach to somebody to ask them to consider coming to talk to you about working at your company. And every piece of that adds up over time to what it feels like to work in the company and the difference and the impact that they can make. We've recently done a lot of work on our employer brand and our brand promise and all of those good things. And what they do is they sort of have helped us codify what matters most to us at Upwork, and our tools for retention and our tools for recruitment as well. I think using the flexibility is powerful, and it's no longer a differentiator in the way that it was certainly for companies like us 4 or 5 years ago. But now it's much more focused on, these are the boundaries you can hold, and this is how you'll be equipped to hold those boundaries around taking breaks and looking after yourself. Here's the mental well-being programs we have. Certainly our benefits offering and our benefits suite has changed dramatically in the last 2 years in terms of being much more inclusive for how people are living their lives now. Building in the flexibility of that and being open about the journey we've been on to transform our culture around higher impact work with, more specific time set aside for breaks. we've built out a program at Upwork in the last sort of 18 months or so called Charge Up, because we too have unlimited vacation, which has actually seen, a decrease in the amount of time people actually take away. And so one of the things we've built into the model is we communicate much more often about working in a sprint and then pause model. And so we encourage each team to do that as is appropriate. So for our finance team, it's after the quarter closes, make sure everybody takes a day or two off together, not necessarily to go somewhere together, but everybody stops at the same time. And then twice a year, we're building in full programs around Charge Up to extend what are long weekends in the US primarily, to build in time where the entire company stops. And so at that point, you really stand out if you're the one sending the email, because we've said intentionally, this is a 5-day weekend for the entire community, because as much as I can step away, if my boss is still actively working, it's really hard for me not just to sneak it when I'm like going to the bathroom at the restaurant or whatever with my family. And so I think that being intentional about the time that you do that together is hugely helpful, because it creates this moment of pause and recharge. And the weeks after that are phenomenal, because people come back really revved up to get back to it together.
Matt, what about Polly? What are some of the things you can do to recruit and retain?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, we actually, do some of those shutdown weeks as well, where, we kind of pause across the organization. We've got one planned around, the 4th of July. We're using that, already kind of long weekend, just to extend it off across a week. And really, to Zoe's point, it's really to allow everybody to kind of recharge, right? Stay off of the work. And when you come back, it's different, right? Because normally when you come back from a vacation, everything's just built up for a week, right? And you've got just so much and you're just kind of drained. But when everybody in the organization is truly taking that time off, you come back and it's just another day, right? It's not, a lot of buildup that you have. And so I think, that type of thing helps. To Zoe's point as well, I think, the flexibility thing that, used to be a differentiator for some companies has changed. And I think all of us need to kind of look at, what are those benefits, and even to the culture aspect, what is going to set us apart? And I think that's probably where the next layer of thinking needs to keep going.
Drew, what about what you were doing in terms of, because bringing people on and then keeping them is key?
Yeah, we're not at a stage where we can do that yet, right? We don't give extended holidays yet. We're, a hyper-growth kind of 2-year business, and so I don't think we give ourselves that luxury, although perhaps we should. I think it's much more about empowerment within the organization. So when we think about growth within the company, I want everyone to come in and know that there's a path forward as you wish, right? So yes, we are remote by nature. We don't focus on hours and time that you're working. I don't really care about that at all, as long as we're getting the job done. I care much more about contribution to the team and the culture. And I care about mobility and growth within the organization, right? I want everybody to move up with the company as we grow, because we are in hyper-growth mode. So, when I joined, we had 67 people. That was 6 months ago. Now we have 166. We'll be 300 or so by the end of the year. So the way that I think about retention and recruitment as it relates to a vibrant culture and the energy we talked about, is really empowering people to be the best version of themselves possible, and us investing in whatever that means. So we do all these little things like work from home budget, and we give people flexibility to work any way they want to. But what's really important to me is that they feel as though they can really find a sense of themselves within the company and can grow within the company. And that's really the angle we take most predominantly right now.
And it's got to be exciting because you're in that growth phase, so that will evolve over time too.
That's true, but I think now we have more of an obligation than ever before as leaders within our company to be super transparent about everything happening in the organization. All the decisions we're making in the executive vision of the business, and why we're making changes, if we're making changes, good or bad, because people are so invested now. Like, if we're not careful, it's easier for them to become increasingly disengaged and increasingly distant from, the nucleus of our brand and what we're trying to achieve as businesses. So I think it's more important than ever before we're as transparent as can be, completely transparent in why we make the decisions we do.
Dietra, what about you, like in terms of some strategies, in terms of retaining? Because I think that's a tricky one too. You were talking about like making sure people stick around, Drew. Like I think that's a big one, that maybe bringing people on is one thing, but keeping them.
So this is probably going to sound like the most simplistic answer you've ever heard, but I just ask. I tell my people that good leaders have all the right answers, but great leaders ask all the right questions. And so I am very keen on asking my people two very important things. Why would you leave and why do you stay? And that why would you leave is so important to me. And so sometimes retention for me is just keeping them longer than their shelf life. And so if you don't know this, I'm going to pull back the curtain. Every single employee you has a shelf
Don't
life.
say it.
They all have a shelf life. Your job is to extend that shelf life for as long as possible. And so the why would you leave is so important to me because what of that can I give you for as long as possible to keep you here and as highly productive as possible? And part of that is preparing you for whatever your next is. I can't tell you how many employees I have kept for 2 years longer than their shelf life simply because I was giving them what they needed to be prepared for whatever their next was. And their next may have been, hey, you stayed long enough for us to create this position for you here, or you know what, I know a person over there, I'll connect the two of you, but this is what they're going to want. How about you do that here, get the experience so you can go there, and people have stayed. So those two questions have been phenomenal for our recruitment and retention. Why do you stay and what would make you leave?
Great questions. Do you do that? Like, when do you ask that question? Is that a performance review conversation?
Oh, we have
Is
it
that
all the time.
Just randomly?
I am a bourbon girl, so I'll have my people over like, oh, let's do a Zoom over bourbon and have a happy hour. And I ask that collectively and individually. I check in quite often and ask, what would make you leave? Or I feel like you're not performing at the level you were performing. Tell me what's going on. What's missing in your work that's caused your performance to decline? And can we give you that? And if we can't, how do we help you transition to whatever will get you back to where you were?
See, and now, if you have questions, there's the QR code here. Make sure that because now I have a question. What's your favorite bourbon? Because I'm a bourbon guy too.
So Eagle Rare is amazing.
Yes, I've had Eagle Rare before.
Whistle Pig is also amazing.
Also
Good
delicious.
stuff. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But if we're getting close
sorry.
to the end.
Oh.
No, it's good.
We said we
can
were
keep
going to
going.
have shots up here.
We
You
did.
lied to
We
me.
did.
This is how they tricked me, y'all. They tricked me.
But we don't do shots of bourbon. That's not how you drink that
No,
stuff.
that's not how you do it. You
no,
have to
that's sipping.
savor it.
If you have questions, you know how to do it. There have been enough panels now that you know how to ask. But I've got one more question before we get into the questions from people out there. So, Dietra, I'll come back to you. Has work culture changed in a good way or a bad way due to this remote element that's been introduced?
I think it's changed in a neutral way. I think we lied to ourselves about how good work culture was when we saw each other face to face, right? I've been in HR for way longer than you could probably imagine. And so when I hear people, even in places where I was head of HR at a large university, and they talk about, oh, the culture is shifted because of remote work, and I look at them and say, you do remember I used to head HR here, and this culture sucked. Like, nothing's changed. What was already there is still there. We're just not face-to-face with it. And so when you look at your culture and you think, oh, it's declined because we're now remote, that's a lie. Because culture are people and actions, not places and privileges. And so they took those same people and actions to a different location. Now, the bad culture is location independent. And so it's not where people are that's a bad culture. It's how they are that creates a bad culture.
Matt, what about you?
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think it's just different, right? And a lot of that now goes back, and leaders really have to be in charge a little bit more, right? And so they need to understand the work styles and the way that people interact and how to make that happen. Because I think a lot of that would naturally happen previously just in an office environment and people stopping by and seeing others. And now, so it's really trying to understand, what makes them tick. Like, why are you going to leave? What would make you leave and what would make you stay? And I think more of those conversations are starting to happen because we almost kind of took it for granted that, in some cases, the employers would be the employer in town, right? And that's where everybody wanted to work because that's where they were living for personal reasons or for family reasons, whatever. And now we see it where you can work for almost any company across the world just because it's so much easier now. And so I think companies are having to kind of adapt to that and have some of those harder conversations to get people to stay rather than, kind of switching that streaming service, I'm going to cancel you and start this other one with a flip of a switch. It's got to be more intentional.
Zoe, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, again, you've been doing the remote stuff for quite some time, but it's interesting to see how things are emerging. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with what they've both said. I think the other thing is that leadership has changed drastically. And it used to be, we were indoctrinated in one of a handful of ways about what successful leadership looked like. And now it's, it's a real blessing and a privilege and also more of a challenge in that leading is really a one-to-one in so many different instances. And so the way it feels for me to work for you versus somebody else is going to be different. And so that matters. And when you're managing groups that are significantly broad and at different levels and different places in their career and different places in their life, they need different things from you. So it's this tremendous opportunity to be more of an authentic person yourself and more open to who you are and build that connection around, fostering the ongoing partnership within your team. And it's hard, but I think it's a real net positive for what it means to show up and be part of a team and a collective working together, because you are going to be able to do it as more of your full self in the place that's best for you.
We've got a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to jump right to those. This is from Anonymous, who has a few questions. How do you believe culture changes as you scale from 10 to 100 to 500 and so on in terms of employees? Some words of advice for a leader at the 20-person mark. What do you wish you knew back then? Zoe, I'm going to start with you because, Drew, you're in the growth phase, so you probably could use...
I can tell him what we're going through right now and what I would...
Yeah.
What I would have...
Go ahead. You
sure?
Yeah. Fire away.
So I've heard a lot about this in the past day and a half. Documentation. Right, like writing down what you are as a business and how you operate. I don't know if that's belabored at this point in time. I'm just trying to get a sense from the room. What's more belabored, documentation or asynchronous? Okay. So I would love to, that going from 20 to 50 to 100, everything starts to get more complicated. Everything becomes more matrixed and things get lost easier. So having a single location where you're able to identify what exactly is where and a really fluid onboarding process where people are really brought into the organization as fluidly as possible, I think getting that nailed right now would be significantly beneficial and much more challenging if you wait until you get to 100 or 300 people.
I saw Zoe do this, so Zoe, go ahead. I have a feeling you agree.
Oh my goodness. I wish I could go back in time and change our documentation processes because it's not optimal, shall we say, diplomatically, as it is right now. I think that's such a truism. And I think clarity around communication, if you build that at 20 and then you expand it, that is going to be the hardest thing for you, where you could just get everybody on a Zoom relatively quickly or in a room very quickly at 20. At 200, you can't in the same fashion. And you're relying on people leaders to communicate what you want them to know throughout the organization. So make that as easy as possible. And then just one other plug. I was just talking to a founder this morning, and a piece of advice I gave him was get your levels and your comp structure handled as quickly as possible, because it feels like something you can figure out later, but boy, is it going to bite you in the behind if you don't get your arms around it as early as humanly possible, because as the market moves and talent is very much in control in so many factors right now, you could cause unintended ripple effects that cause problems elsewhere in your organization if you don't get a structure in place as soon as it's even barely viable for you.
We've got a question here from Jose. Dietra, I'll start with you on this one. How should we adjust our team's culture to align with the new remote reality?
You shouldn't. Your team culture is your team culture no matter where you are, and I can't say that enough. It should not adjust. And so as you're shifting, what this shift does is it reveals the culture that we thought we had, but we actually don't have. We kind of hope it happens, and you have to be intentional about it so it doesn't shift at all. That reality does not shift with where they're located. It's going to be the same no matter where they are.
I kind of wish that was the last question, so you could have dropped this mic. Because Matt, this one I want to talk to you about first initially because it has to do with like the actual hardware, and I know Poly deals with hardware. But this is related to video. Video is a wonderful tool for connection, but it also highlights economic inequity. Like, so thoughts on how this may contribute to like camera fatigue, and we're talking about, I'll add like technology in general, like the stuff that people are using, and how does it even impact collaboration, and let's talk about the vibrancy of team culture at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I know Dieter kind of brought that up earlier, right? So there are some of those, I don't want you to see what's behind me. And so, I think we all have to be open to that. We love video, obviously. It's part of our culture because it does allow those connections. So I started 6 months ago, so I was a pandemic hire myself. And, the amount of connections we were able to make over video was just absolutely amazing. I felt like, after the first time I saw many of my coworkers in person, I felt like I had been working with them for years, right? Just because we were able to build those connections. However, again, I think we do kind of understand that there are those inequities that still exist out there. And so I think we have to be open. I think Harry kind of, mentioned that a little bit earlier too, right? Yes, we want people on video, but we also respect when you're not on video. It's not a requirement. We like it, but everybody's in a different spot. Again, it could just be where you're traveling at or what is in the background. You might have kids around. And so you might just need to kind of get away. And so you shouldn't always have to be camera first and camera focused all the time.
Anyone else want to chime in on that? Any thoughts on that? No? We're good. All right, moving on to the next one. This one's a very specific one, and I would love someone to chime in terms of whether they're seeing this or not. I'm sure we're going to get a raised hand. We just had our third developer receive a very high paid job offer elsewhere, which we cannot match. And our salaries are good. Is anyone else seeing this?
Yes.
Everyone's seeing this.
See, not all at once.
This is the other pandemic.
This is the other pandemic.
Okay, so what are your thoughts?
I say congratulations.
There you go.
Yeah, I'd ask him what else is important to them beyond the compensation to identify if there's a driving factor that we can contribute towards and help them achieve within the organization. But if it's a great offer and it's a company that they're interested in, I think we can only be happy for them. Like Dieter said, everyone's got a shelf life, right? No one's going to stay with us forever. We're not going to stay with us forever.
And this is why that shelf life conversation is so important. And shelf life varies based on what's going on around us economically, whatever. And so when you are prepared for that person to leave, let's say if this person comes in, I know I have a year with them, I am not caught off guard when they come and say, hey, it's been a year and 3 months, I'm leaving. I'm not like, clutch the pearls, how dare you depart? So that shelf life, measuring what the shelf life should be, and it's easy to make that measurement, it's so important so that you're prepared for their departure. So if I know historically there is someone out there outbidding me, I've been keeping the numbers, our developers are going to stay with us about 18 months. At month 12, I'm already preparing myself I have a pipeline of who's going to fill that position. Even if that means there's some succession planning internally, I get people in here, they're not quite developed, but I can start developing my own workforce because I know what the shelf life of this person is, so I'm not shocked.
Yeah, you're nothing that proactivity, like in a big way.
Yeah, and I think just real quickly, I think some of it goes back to having that culture, right? So creating an environment that people would want to stay in. Obviously, if they've got such a great offer, sometimes that money is going to override that culture some. But we've actually seen some of that boomerang effect, right? Where people leave and then they're like, well, the money was nice, but, maybe it came with some hidden perks behind it, right? That I just didn't like that culture there as much, or I didn't like who I was working for, and start to kind of come back into the organization as well. So, I think if you have that environment and that culture that we're talking about building, people will want to gravitate to that. So I think that's just another highlight of why you've got to keep that in mind.
And I want to piggyback on what Matt just said. You need to ask yourself, how do they sound when they're departing?
Right.
If they're like, I am leaving, you're like, culture might be off. But if it's like, oh my gosh, I really hate, the only thing is my family needs, and this is going to put us in a better economic situation, and I just really wish, are you sure you can't find the extra dollars? Then you have an idea of where my culture actually is, right? So that's a great kind of measure. Are we hitting the target, or are they skipping out of here like clicking their heels in the air on the way out?
Yeah, for some of those offers, it's life-changing money for
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
individuals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zoe, do you want to chime in on this one?
Yes, I wish I were there because yes on all of that. I think the other piece is we want Upwork to be a great place to be from. We're proud of our teams who grow and their careers flourish, and then they are ready to take on another challenge. Like, if we don't have that for them, then, like Dietrich said, like, we want to connect you with somebody who can help you do that. And we're going to see exceptional leaders in different parts of business throughout, the community, who then can reach back in and help other people grow. I think there's nothing wrong with people leaving in a positive way and being successful and saying, I came from Upwork. Here's what I learned there. Let me show you that. Like, I love that pollination across multiple industries.
So we got one more question, and it's going to be a quick bite. At the end of my podcast, I always say, what's one quick tip? So it's actually really good, Philippe. What is your number one tip to attract the right talent that can fit your company mission, value, and culture? And I'm going to go this away, so I'm going to start with you. Just one quick tip. Drew, go.
Golly, one quick tip to attract the right talent to fit your company vision.
I'll go, and I'll give you
Thank
time.
you.
I will say you first need to be extremely clear on who and how you are, so you know what the expectations of people are coming in, so they can upfront decline or accept, knowing what the expectation is coming in the door.
Matt?
I would agree. I think it comes down to transparency, putting that information out there, screening candidates, letting them know this is the culture here from the beginning. Whether that's in your marketing post that you have out there or the conversations that the talent acquisition team has with them, have that up front.
Zoe?
We encourage every leader to have a last call before the offer is made about, here's what's great about working for me, here's what stinks about it. I want you to come in eyes wide open, and I'm committed to working on all these things, but I don't want you to come here and feel like there was something you didn't know.
Drew?
Yep. Remove any bias you can from the conversation, right? And that qualification process.
That's our time, everybody. Thanks to all of you for being up here with me today. This is great. Thanks to Running Rope for having us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.